Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us again for the program this evening with Professor Bolaji Akinyemi. As usual, it promises to be an exciting time, and it's really very exciting to us this evening because this is a town hall edition. We have some guests in the virtual studio who will be putting their questions directly to Prof, as we call him on the program. Prof, you are welcome, sir. As usual, thank you again for being here this evening.
Thank you very much for having me. And thank you for our colleagues who will be joining us on the virtual model. I don't know who really is more nervous, them or me, but I can tell you I'm nervous uh, at having the interaction with them. But I look forward to our interaction.
Fantastic. Uh, I think, Prof, last week we there was a question I put to you, but we didn't have enough time to deal with that question. And we promised our viewers that we were going to start with that question this week. And the question relates to the United States, and it's this. It was a question we got from Facebook. It says, is this the end of the Republican Party as we know it? What is the possibility of a MAGA party or a new Republican Party led by the anti Trump faction?
Yes, I do remember that question. And I do remember our promise um, to deal with it right at the beginning of this program. And I'm happy that we switched it over because two things have happened since last week, which, while they have not changed my mind, they have confirmed the way my mind was going to address the question. And what are these two things? The first was an interview done with the chief of staff to Mike Pence, the former um, vice president under Trump. And I was aghast that he still repeated the lies being manufactured about how there was cheating in the last elections. And he mentioned Pennsylvania, he mentioned Wisconsin, even though he tempered it by saying, look, Biden is now the president and we'll work with him. But the person interviewing him gave him three opportunities to change his mind. But no, he, even given the fact that there were consequences to the views held, which posed a danger to the life of his former boss, the vice president, he still repeated those manufactured lies on the air. That's the first thing. The second issue was to hear Republican senators during the hearings on, again, the January 6th insurrection, continuing to maintain the lies and the manufactured um, facts from their side um, about the election being stolen, and also adding to it the fact that, well, the people who invaded Congress were not really all Trump supporters, but that there were security forces who were acting as agent provocateur. There were all sorts of idiotic declarations. And it then really confirmed in my mind that the Republican Party, as we know it, before Trump is dead. And there is no way that Trump's Republican Party can coexist or resolve the contradictions within the present Republican Party with the Reagan Republicans, the Lincoln Republicans, and even the Bush Republicans. So I think what I suspect will happen is the strength of Trump's hold on the Republican Party is so pervasive that it is the Lincoln Republicans and the Reagan Republicans, the Bush Republicans, who will leave the Republican Party with its name and go and form another political party, or because people tend to forget that there are independents who run as independents and who win as independents, but cooperate with the Democratic Party, especially in the Senate. And perhaps this is what is likely to happen. I don't know what will be the future of any wing of the Republican Party that breaks away and leaves the present Trump with the present Republican Party. I don't know what will be the fate, but I am absolutely sure that they cannot coexist within the same party, and that as of now, Trump holds, if you pardon the pawn, Trump holds the Trump card. He holds he controls the mind, what as it is, of the majority of the Republicans. Not that they really believe in him, but they think he controls the voters that they will need to come back into office. And you see, keep it in mind how the Republican Party got to where it is now. Go back to the Tea Party. And I think we've talked about it on this program once before, that the Tea Party actually marked the slow degeneration of the traditional Republican Party, to the extent that McCain conferred legitimacy on the Tea Party by making that lady his vice presidential nominee. And even though they lost, but they gained so much mileage, the Tea Party gained so much mileage by being brought into the Republican Party during that election. And what I didn't pay attention to, and I'm not sure how many of us paid attention to, was that most of the Republicans who won election into Congress and into the Senate, even though they lost to Obama, were actually, their roots were in the Tea Party. And that's what made life so difficult for Obama. Underlining that was racism and what I will call, I won't even call it economic nationalism. I think economic naivety. These were the two underlying factors behind what has now transmuted into Trump Republican Party. So basically, to round up, Trump is going to hold the key Republican Party, have it under his control, and the Reagan Republican Party and Lincoln Republican Party. Some of them actually live and merge with the Democrats. Others may decide they will stay independent, but they'll be voting with the Republicans. I don't see them beating Trump at any election.
Wow. Thank you for that response, Prof. Let's now go to our first guest from the virtual studio. We've got Khadija from the virtual studio. Please, can you please say your name and ask your question of the Prof?
Thank you very much. My name is Khadija Sanusi Gumbi, and I'm very happy to be here. Good evening, Prof, and good evening, everyone. Now, my question is concerning the COVID-19 pandemic. We are faced with this pandemic, and it comes with a lot of challenges. Now, Prof, sir, how do you see switching from conventional classrooms to virtual classrooms, and how this will continue to pave way for the discourse of poverty and inequality in developing and underdeveloped societies?
Thank you very much, Khadija, for that question. I mean, that's a fundamental question you've raised, and I must concede to you that we in the developing country have lost quite a lot having to use, because we really didn't have a choice, having to use the virtual model of lecturing for reasons that I'm sure either your students or other students who will have told you. Not all students have access to the internet connection. The internet connection is seldom steady. We have problems with the supply of power, so that can cut off at any point in time. There are some disciplines like social science, like the arts, that are more amenable to virtual lecturing, while science is not really that amenable. And so science students are likely to have suffered more than social science students. However, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and that is the vaccine. Because with the vaccine, and there are going to be a lot of assumptions here, assuming that we get our acts together. Not all developing countries are going to be serious about this. I'm not happy, I must say this openly, that Ghana has got its own supply of vaccine before Nigeria. We have the money. We have the personnel. But, our style of governance does not put Nigeria, and for that matter, other African countries, in a model where they can even take advantage of what's available to them. However, having said that, if I assume in the next 3-4 months, we will get the vaccines, into developed countries, not in the quantity in which we will want to have it. But once they start coming in, I would very much suggest to government in any of the developing countries that doctors, nurses, students, and their lecturers, as a bulk, should have access to that vaccine. And if that happens, then we can gradually move away from virtual lecturing to now having face-to-face lecturing. Because from information now available, we are still at the beginning of what I will call vaccine examination. But from what is starting to become available, I think we can be optimistic that vaccination will protect you from infection and it will protect you from spreading the virus, provided you continue to use mask, you continue to wash your hands, and as much as possible, you continue to maintain what I will call the physical distancing. However, what I have noticed from monitoring this is that really, once you use the mask, and I suppose you wash your hands regularly, you don't really need to keep that kind of a distance that will make it difficult for a lecturer to lecture in a class or for a teacher to interact with students. Because in a way, infection comes, from the nose and the mouth. So once that is covered by the mask, you'll be fine. Your students will be fine. The lecturers will be fine. So let's not give up hope. I think that we will get over this virus, not that we will abolish it. It may just become like the normal Harmattan infection we get in December to February. So you'll have cold, you'll have sneezing. Once you've got the vaccination, it will never disappear, but it will stop being a killer and it will stop interfering with the kind of interaction between lecturers and students and what have you. But there are a lot of ifs I've put in there. Getting the vaccination in such quantity that you will have the herd immunity. It's not sufficient in a university of 6,000 students to have only 1,000 vaccinated. Or you vaccinate lecturers, you don't vaccinate students, then it won't work. Or you do the vaccination and you throw away the mask, then it won't work. All these factors have to go along together. But I will say to you, please don't give up hope on education and let the students know that within a year, 1.5 years, we probably will be back to as normal as possible. Maybe not normal of yesterday, but definitely not normal of today.
Mhm. Thank you for that, Prof. We'll go to our next guest from the virtual studio audience. Please unmute yourself now. Layeni Hakim. Can you please unmute yourself? All right. Unmute yourself, please. Layeni, can you unmute yourself, please? Okay, brilliant.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Prof. Sir. Good evening, Ambassador Olumoko. My question is, terrorism continues to be an issue that cuts across continents. The situation has been especially bad in Africa. What is your view, sir, on the position of terrorism, especially in Africa?
For that. I think your audio was a little cracking there. Prof, the
Mm.
question was this: terrorism continues to be an issue that cuts across continents. The situation has been especially bad in Africa. What is your view on the position of the United Nations Security Council in tackling terrorism?
Uh-huh. Um, you know, apart from COVID-19 as a pandemic, I would say terrorism is another pandemic that has faced the global community. And just as we have so far failed in controlling, combating, and exterminating COVID-19, we have also failed in tackling terrorism, dealing with the underlying issues that I brought up, and bringing it under control. And the reason the United Nations has not succeeded in handling it is, let me use that famous, cliche that came on board towards the end of colonialism and apartheid, that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And that had been imported into the terrorist pandemic as we know it today. Let me use one state as an illustration. Take what happened, in fact, let me use two states. Take what happened in Libya and what happened in Syria. Now, Western countries went into both Libya and Syria, arming and supporting various factions under the guise that they were going to get rid of dictators and promote democracy. And they really didn't look, if you like, at the qualifications of people they were supporting. Just as long as you said you were against Gaddafi or you were against Assad in Syria, they supported you. They gave you weapons. They didn't control what those people were doing. Now, in the case of Libya, as soon as they got rid of Gaddafi, they left and went somewhere else to cause trouble. But they left their weapons there. And the groups that they have empowered, they left them there. And those people had agendas of their own. Some of the agendas were religious. Some of them were ideological. Some of them were ethnic oriented. Then they moved into Syria, and the same thing happened in Syria, except that the Syrian regime was more stable than they thought it was going to be and was able to fight back. It was not a pushover like the Gaddafi regime in Libya. And it fought up until the Western countries eventually got tired, number one. Number two, the Russians came in and supported the Assad regime. We also know, of course, what the Israelis got up to in Syria. So, apart from destabilizing Syria, I don't see what they tried to call the Syrian Spring achieved. But given the fact that the big powers in the Security Council were precisely the people who sponsored the events that then led to terrorist activities, there's no way that the Security Council will be effective, because to be effective, you need a consensus amongst the permanent members of the Security Council. What is even more, especially for African countries, tragic, what's more tragic was that when Gaddafi was overthrown, from the point of view of Gaddafi, the liberation fighters that he had, or the forces that had helped him to maintain power in Libya, were now driven out of Libya with their weapons. They carried their weapons with them. They looted military stores and fled into the Sahara Desert. And from the Sahara Desert, they now went into West Africa and into Nigeria especially. And most of the so-called herdsmen, kidnappers, bandits that you have here are not Nigerians. Now we know that everybody has said that. The government itself has said that. Well, who are they? They were people who came from Libya post-Gaddafi. And that is why we now have this major problem on our hand. And the same thing transmitted into the Central African Republic. So the direct answer to your question is that the purveyors of terrorist activities in Africa are precisely those you will need in the Security Council, for the Security Council to be able to address this issue. And I'm afraid. So, to me, the solution is for each nation to get its act together. Don't look at the United Nations. Don't look in the direction of the United Nations for support. Get your act together. Build a consensus amongst your elite. Because if you don't have a consensus amongst the elite in addressing not only the question of terrorism, but the questions that face your country, then in fact, several sections of your elite may end up ganging up with the terrorists just to destabilize the government, in the hope that if they destabilize the government, they will be the beneficiary. That's not going to work. So each country in Africa will have to get its act together. Use the African international organizations, whether ECOWAS or even the African Union, build a consensus there, and then use that to face down the terrorists and defeat them. The defeat has to be done internally, not externally. I don't know whether that addressed the issue that he has in mind.
Did the prof address your question, or do you want to clarify that further? I think there's some audio problems there. Let's move over to file to put your question across to the prof. Please unmute yourself to file.
Prof. My question for today is, how would you react to the continuous detention of Alexander Navalny and his supporters by the Russian government, despite all calls from the Western counterparts, I mean the European Union, to release him? We've seen that the Russian government has kept on detaining Alexander Navalny, and how would you react to this?
Prof, did you get the question?
Yes, he faded off towards the end, but I got the question.
Okay.
You see, surprisingly, there is a relationship in the last two questions, because he predicated his question on what the European Union had done, and, calls by the international community to Putin to release the gentleman Vassell. But the fact is, you must ask yourself one basic question. Do the Russians perceive Vassell as a destabilizing agent internally, or do they see him as a liberating factor in Russian politics? To understand what is happening in Russia now, you have to go back to the collapse of the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia lost its parity of status with the United States. There's one thing that I have found out in studying the politics of several countries, and that is, irrespective of the complaints that they may have about their government, they still take pride when their country, not the government, when their country is rising up there. They take pride in it. They are happy. They are unhappy when their country falls in status, in prestige, in respect, even though in the course of that, it may get rid of a hated government. I discovered that even though the Russians were fed up with the Communist Party and the communist government, the Russians were very unhappy with, number one, the way Russia lost status with the United States. Number two, they were unhappy with the way democracy brought in so many factions jostling for power. And number three, they were unhappy with, what should I call it? The control of their country by criminals. And number four, they were unhappy with the loss of the Commonwealth, their assets, their wealth, their riches to a cabal, a handful of the apparatchik, who now became multi millionaires. And it was these millionaires that were now running government and not the other way around. And so when Putin came along in the profile of the strong man, Russia has always loved the strong man because, listen, Russia is not a country. Russia is a continent from east to west that you needed strong hands to pull Russia together and prevent further disintegration after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So when Putin came along, the Russians rallied to him, especially when they saw how he started dealing with the cabal, dealing with the criminals. The Russians didn't give a hoot about human rights, democracy, because they saw human rights and democracy as avenues for the United States and even Russia to seek to penetrate Russia and control Russia. And if you listen to the statements made at that time by Hillary Clinton, who was Secretary of State of the United States, those statements were ill-advised. You don't address Russia the way you would address, a third world country. And yet that's what she did. And the United States was interfering in the politics and in the election of Russia. That's why I find it, um, I often fell off my chair laughing when America complains about Russia interfering in its election. The United States have been trying, in the name of democracy and human rights, have been interfering in the domestic affairs of not only Russia, but of several countries in the world. So to that extent, this man may be able to put 1 million demonstrators on the road in Moscow or St. Petersburg. But Russia, how many millions are you dealing with? 1 million, 2 million out of over 100 million. So, of course, the Western press will focus its attention on the demonstrators on the streets, but they won't tell you that those demonstrators, what is their percentage vis-a-vis the totality of the population of the Russians. I believe, and believe me, I'm not in favor of Putin, please, don't get me wrong. I'm not in favor of dictators. I fought, along with Nadeko, fought one in this country. Any scholar will welcome freedom to think and to speak, just like we are doing now. None of us is afraid that we will step out and there will be the Secret Service waiting to arrest us for whatever we may say on this program. However, I admire the way Putin has put Russia back together. And maybe that was why someone like me, if admired Murtala Mohammed within the context of the history of my own country. Now, why did he go back? Surely he must have known that this was a direct challenge to Putin. Why did he leave Germany to go back? Let me just quickly see a sentence about what I will call the German factor in Russian history. At the tail end of the First World War, Russia has lost the war. Germany has lost the war. The Germans shipped the communists, the members of the Communist Party, Lenin, Stalin, and the others, they shipped them back to Russia as it was then. And they overthrew the Tsar, assassinated all members of the royal family, and that was the beginning of the communist government in Russia that lasted, I don't know how many decades. And millions were killed by Stalin. That is the German factor in Russian history. So for this man to have left Germany to go back to Russia, there was a significance to it, which is lost on the press that doesn't go back into history to explain why certain things happen or people react the way they will react. I don't see Putin releasing him. I think he will be kept in prison. And he's not, anyway, let's not go that far. I don't see Putin releasing him.
All right, Prof. Thank you for that. We've got another guest in the studio who would like to ask you a question. Damlola, can you please unmute yourself?
Okay, my question goes, so what would you consider the implication of the recent statement of international relations?
Can't hear at all. Mr. Moderator, you want
Yes,
to
I think
repeat?
she had some sound issues there. But the question she was asking was, what do you consider the implication of the recent Mars mission on international relations?
Thank you. I wasn't expecting this question, but thank you for asking. It has several factors. Number one, I'm happy to be an African. I'm happy to be a Black African, but I wish I were an Arab because of the UAE's success with the first Arab country and the first developing country to have sent a satellite to Mars. Several countries have sent rockets, around the circumference of the Earth, but this was a special mission. And I ask, what has happened to African countries who have the resources, who have the brains? What has happened? They've got their attention and their focus diverted to mundane things. And that is what a government that has a focus and a vision for its country can do. Believe me, that Mars mission by the UAE has raised the profile and the prestige of not just the UAE, but of Arab countries. It has raised, because it has shown that they can do it. So this is not a victory for the UAE, it's a victory for the Arab countries. So to that extent, I salute the Arab nation as a people. The success of the Chinese must also be acknowledged. And then the success of the United States. I sat down and I watched, because that one of the United States was the most difficult. You know, all the others were circling Mars and taking pictures and sending the pictures back to us. But what the United States did was to actually land that satellite on the surface of Mars. For scientists, it must be the epitome of success. And even though I'm not an American and I'm not a scientist, I shared in the success of the American mission. And you positioned your question within the context of international politics. This is not going to be lost on diplomats. It's not going to be lost in negotiation because, as I've said, it has increased the profile of the successful countries. Nobody's going to look down. In any case, for decades now, if not over a century, nobody has looked down on China. That period was over. And nobody is, in spite of the loss of prestige under Trump, the United States is still a great, a powerful nation. So it has no problem consolidating its success. But for the UAE and for the Arabs, you know, they can sit back, strengthen their shoulders, and let you know we did it. So you listen to us when we are talking about other things, or we are making a contribution as part of the conflict resolution on other things. You better listen to us. We are no longer just a desert country, a small desert country that you can just wave off or listen to just out of, oh, you're just humoring them. Let's humor them, listen to them. No, if they decide to talk for 1 hour, UAE, you will listen. But where is the African contribution? Where is the African status? Where is the African role in all of this? And what hurts is that it doesn't have to be this way. We still continue to be victims, and we still continue to make ourselves victims in terms of international politics. In other words, we are the ones you humor. Oh, you are the ones you send aid to. Oh, we are the ones that, you know, you feel sorry for. And yet the resources are there, personnel is there, brains are there for us to. So I hope if there's any government listening to us on this program today, I hope that in 3 years' time, we will have an African, I'm not being parochial, so I'm not saying a Nigerian satellite, an African satellite up there. If, believe me, if a country like Rwanda has the resources that some African countries have, I bet you there will have been an African satellite in Mars now.
Thank you, Prof, for that. We want to bring on Abiola now. Abiola, please unmute yourself.
All right, good evening. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Prof. My name is Abiola Razak. Okay, so my question is, international relations through multilateral institutions remains an active approach to tackling global challenges. However, we see cases of units within a nation, within a union, for instance, Scotland in the United Kingdom, trying to have like their own arrangements with other international organizations. For instance, despite UK's exit from the EU, Scotland is still trying to have its own arrangements with the EU. So these cases, what is your opinion of the impact of this arrangement on this state, this country as a whole, their foreign policy?
Thank you for the question. My reading of the Scottish factor in the United Kingdom confrontation with the EU. In fact, I think it's a classic case that we scholars will need to study, analyze carefully as to, we can use it to illustrate why there is nothing that is permanent in international relations. At a time when messages were being sent on horses, diplomats were being put on plane to fly 6 hours or 8 hours around the world to carry messages and so on. The way and manner in which relationships are carried out will be different from now, when we can do it by Zoom, apart from the fact that it is cheaper. We can do it by Zoom. And if you could do it by Zoom, issues then become not only easier, but the urgency that comes into addressing issues also become urgency in finding solutions to issues. And so a country, a unit within a larger unit, then feels that, look, it doesn't need to have the resources of this great United Kingdom or have the resources of the Soviet Union or have the resources of what you attach to big nations in order to play an active role in multinationalism, in multilateralism. Because not only Zoom, but iPad, the kinds of things that are now available, that means the First Minister of Scotland to be able to communicate with the Secretary General of the United Nations at the press of a button. And so to that extent, I see an increase in what I would call sub-nationalism, increasing as the style of multilateralism changes. I say it because now people are going to be raising issues of what do we gain in terms of our relationship with others by being a member of this larger unit. One of the things which you will have to pay attention to, of course, is whether military means as a component of multilateralism is diminishing or increasing. The geographical factor comes into play. If you are in Southeast Asia now, if you are in Australia or New Zealand or Malaysia or Philippines, and you are peeping at China, breaking away from a larger unit is not going to look attractive to you, because invariably you are going to be looking at the military factor as a factor of your protection. And we still haven't found any way of making the military factor cheaper. It costs money, it costs resources. Whereas in the relationship between United Kingdom and the European Union, they are not going to go to war. They will rattle barrels, and there are prime ministers who will sound bellicose from time to time. I won't mention any particular name, but they are not going to resort to war. So to that extent, Scotland, Wales, well, do we really need to be part of the United Kingdom? But there are also nations, even within the European Union, who feel if Scotland breaks away from from England, from the United Kingdom, well, why do we also, talking about Sweden, talking about Finland, why do we need to be part of the European Union? We also can stay apart and still have multilateral relationship with the rest of the EU, simply because they're not likely to go to war. So the military factor is going to be less. However, the European Union, please don't forget, is looking at Russia, casting a look at Russia and wanting to have a safeguard against invasion by Russia. That is likely to keep what I would call divisionism under control, because the EU had that military component called NATO. And the Americans would rather they all keep together, because it's easier than for the United States to devise strategies and processes and policies in dealing with Russia, rather than having to negotiate first with the United Kingdom, then negotiate with Wales, negotiate with Sweden, and what have you. They would rather negotiate with the EU economically and with NATO militarily in devising one strategy in dealing with Russia.
Prof, there's a question here before I go back to the virtual studio. This is a question from YouTube. How do you see the prospect for resumption of strategic arms reduction with Russia, as indicated by Joe Biden?
Several factors are going to come into play. Number one, there is a loss of confidence between Russia and the United States. Number two, the resources available to both Russia on one hand and the United States on the other hand are not as much as used to be in the days of Kennedy, Reagan, and what have you. Number three, both Russia and the United States will have to be casting a look in the direction of China. The rising military profile of China is a factor that wasn't there several years ago. So how all of this will play out will mean that in defining the level at which Russia and the United States will have to maintain a parity will be dependent on the need to make their military profiles daunting on China. They cannot afford to reduce their, arms race to the level where China actually feels that it can be stubborn in its diplomatic relations with both Russia or the United States. So to that extent, I don't see the United States and Russia reducing their they could have the arms limitation talks. They could, but I don't see them substantially reducing their arms level to the point where the United States is an Atlantic power, is an Southeast Asian power, and it's a Pacific power, and it would like to maintain those three. Russia is a Mediterranean power, it's an Atlantic power, and it also has, boundaries that jut into the Pacific Sea, the Pacific Ocean. It don't want to be kept out of there. So I'm not expecting any breakthrough in the strategic arms limitation talks between Russia and the United States.
Prof, we have run out of time. There is one question I would beg if you will take before we go. And it's one from YouTube that says, does the presidency of Joe Biden signify a return to the way America's foreign policy was formerly before presidency of Donald Trump?
A simple and direct answer is yes. And there are indices that we can already see. They've gone back to the Paris talks. They've gone back to the World Health Organization, WHO. They've gone back to the United Nations Human Rights Commission. They've started being part of solution-making attitude. The statement by Biden that they are going to contribute to the COVAX, which is to acquire and distribute COVID-19 vaccines to developing countries. So yes, they are going to go back to, when Biden says America is back, he wasn't trying to say America is back as a bully or America is back to dictate terms to everybody, but that America is back as part of a consensus building body on the table where issues are discussed, attempts are made to find solutions, rather than this huff puff, I carry my ball, I'm going away, I'm no longer playing with you, which you get from a petulant child. No, America is back as a mature nation. And I think that to that extent, we are back to pre-Trump's foreign policy of the United States.
Thank you very much, Prof. We have run out of time. To our viewers in the virtual studio and our guests, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being part of the program this evening. There will be another opportunity at the end of next month. The last Thursday of every month, we will have a town hall where you, our viewers, put your questions directly to Prof. To the viewers on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, thank you all again for being there today. Prof, any final words to our viewers and our guests before we bring the program to a close tonight?
I should just thank them for making this program more interesting than it usually is. Thank them for their contribution because it has brought more, more verve into the way and manner in which we are handling things. And the issues they have raised are probably some of which we will not have raised. Their contribution has been absolutely wonderful, and I thank them for that. Happy to see them.
Thank you very much, Prof. And to our viewers, good night. See you again next week.